Hello and welcome to our final live hybrid workforce webinar. Today we'll be reviewing the last 13 webinars in the series, looking into some of the more interesting findings and giving you the opportunity to compare your organization in terms of its approach to hybrid working, the technical preparedness to support that, and priorities for moving forward into the second half of 2021 and beyond. The hybrid workforce series of webinars from SHI, it's been quite a journey. 14 webinars in total, including today, every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time since March 2nd. A big thank you to everyone who attended the live webinars or has viewed some of those on demand as well. And I'd also be remiss in not taking a moment to thank the many folks here at SHI, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes, that made this webinar series happen. It was a true team effort. Now, during that 14-week period, we've looked at how to set up the workforce for success by looking at end-user computing, collaboration, connectivity, and application delivery. We've explored how to support new workloads and operating models with technologies like HCI, public cloud, and networking agility approaches. Of course, security is never far from our mind, and we had dedicated webinars looking at zero trust, XDR, and how to manage your security technology stack. And then finally, to round off the series, we looked at ways to do all of that while optimizing operational costs and efficiencies. Now, the good news is, if you missed any of those sessions, they are all still available for you to view on demand via shi.com/hybrid workforce, or you can use the registration link for this particular webinar to access the On24 portal, and you will see them all there just as you're seeing on screen right now. So let's get started by taking a look at the current situation that's facing a lot of SHI customers right now. On May 25th, during the discussion about the role of IT asset management in supporting the hybrid workforce, we asked the audience to tell us what sort of working model they were currently employing. And as you can see on screen, just over 10% were working fully on site. And we can kind of guess the kinds of industries that might be represented in that sample. We're also starting to see some form of return to the office, however, with 42% of the organizations having at least some of their staff on site. Just shy of 37% are entirely remote. And again, I would think it was a fairly safe bet to guess that a lot of those will be service-based organizations, while 10% are giving their staff what they perceive as full flexibility. Now, based on news reports around the world, it seems a relatively safe bet that, barring any new variants of COVID or resistant to current vaccine options, if we run this poll again in, let's say, 3 or 6 months' time, that 10% figure is likely to be a lot higher, probably at the cost of the remote work figures. Of course, there is a debate as to what flexibility actually looks like. For some, it is total freedom, the ability to focus on just getting the job done rather than a physical place of work. For some industries and organizations, it's perhaps a bit more of a token gesture, maybe that 1 day a week working from home kind of example. Other organizations, of course, have publicly declared that they will mandate a full return to office. I think it's going to be interesting in the next 2 years to see how an organization's attitude to flexible working will affect not only their technology needs, but also their ability to attract and retain talent. I think that's going to be one of the key things that people are looking for when making decisions about what sort of job or what sort of organization they want to work with going forward. Now, there have been a lot of polls and surveys done But they generally all come out around the same, which is that roughly 75% of workers want to come back to the office, but they have strong ideas about how, when, and to some extent why as well. So about 25% of staff want to return to the office full time. And about 25% want to stay remote full time. So it doesn't take a mathematician to work out that a balance there is about 50%. 50% of your workforce that perhaps is going to fit this hybrid moniker. One that is working at home part of the week, working in the office part of the week, could be at various sites during the week, could even be mobile out on the road at airports, etc., etc. Now, another 50%, not exactly the same 50%, but an equal part of the workforce are also expecting their office to change in significant and substantial ways. Now, one phrase I've heard, and I really quite like it myself, is that the office will become a place for, quotes, moments that matter. Now, those moments that matter might be an important team or a customer meeting, an event like a product launch, a quarter end, or a project kickoff. But the thing is, that change in the office purpose will dictate or demand a change in how the office is configured and how it's equipped. We're going to need more personal space. We're going to have more personal space by law in a lot of cases. We're going to need more touchless technology, better systems for booking meeting rooms, more technology to support the kinds of experiences that staff have gotten used to while working at home, but want to continue having, even though they're going back into a physical workspace. For what it's worth, different polls do have slightly different views on this, but an average seems to be that flexible working for the majority of the employee population is roughly 2 days a week at home, 3 days in the office. Now, of course, that's a spectrum, and you will find both ends of the spectrum, but that's where the average seems to be. Now, not everyone agrees. The chap on screen right now is David Solomon, and he is the boss of Goldman Sachs, and he is not a great believer in remote working. He's less clear on whether he supports hybrid working, but in his view, especially junior staff need to be on site because that's where they learn, that's where they interact, that's where they absorb the company culture. And I think in part, I agree with where he's coming from. I think there are some foundation to his concerns. However, I think he struggles with something that affects a lot of business leaders at the moment, and that's trust. Not only trust in the people, the employees themselves, but also the trust in the technology. And I would argue that one thing that we've seen in the last 12 months is that actually the technology can be trusted if it's used in the right way. And that doesn't mean just used by the employees in the right way. It means configured, deployed, and having adoption driven in the right way by the organization. I fear that David's going to find himself a little bit like that little pig that decided to build his house of straw, believing it was going to keep the big bad wolf at bay. I'm not quite sure he's as secure in that position as he might like to be. Of course, Goldman Sachs may be able to dictate working terms more harshly than your organization might be able to. So we are working mostly remotely, at least for now. Now that has big implications for end user computing. And just as we saw more devices and more device types being desired and employed and sent out to staff, another knock-on effect of the pandemic has been a shortage in the global availability of microchips, especially the types that are used in laptops, network devices, and non-5G tablets and phones. So you're probably aware of the recent White House summit that was called by President Biden. Now, we also addressed this in April with a couple of articles on our hub, which is blog.shi.com. And we also created an ebook that offers a number of strategies that are designed to help you adapt and overcome this shortage, which, if we're being brutally honest, is not really showing any signs of abating, probably before the end of this calendar year. Now, speaking of that resources section that I mentioned earlier, you can go grab this ebook from that resources section, or like I say, go to blog.shi.com. And if you put a search in for device shortage, this should be one of the top results that you get back. So in terms of what you told us through the medium of the hybrid workforce webinar series, now on March 9th, we asked the audience, if they had changed the way that they purchased end-user devices with that current chip shortage affecting device supplies. Now, nearly 62% responded that they were accelerating purchases, something that was supported by SHI's ability to help customers pre-ordered kit, to hold it in stock as what we call reserved inventory at one of our facilities, ready to be called out and be provisioned and shipped when it's needed. And one of the really cool things that we were able to do for a number of customers there is to build in finance plans so that they only had to pay for that kit once it was actually in their hands rather than in our warehouse and integration facilities. On May 18th, we asked the audience of our webinar looking at managing end-user devices whether they felt their organization was spending too much time managing those end-user devices. It was a little bit of a loaded question, if we're honest, but the response was overwhelming. Managing end-user devices is taking up too much time. Perhaps no surprise then that we've seen a huge surge in interest in SHI's end-user device management services such as Zero Touch even X, which supports all the major platforms, device types, and manufacturers. We're also seeing strong interest in device as a service, where SHI can take on a lot of the work around device procurement, configuration, provisioning, shipping, security, and even things like recovery and break fix as well. Now, following that poll on May 18th, we then asked the audience to consider their most significant end-user device challenges that they'd experienced over the last year. And you'll see a deliberate error on screen here. So listen to my voice rather than what you're seeing on screen. Here we saw a more even split of challenges, with 42% citing that pricing and availability of end-user devices was their key challenge. And I have a bit of a spoiler alert that I kind of alluded to earlier. My own personal view is that we have not seen the end of these price hikes. So I really would strongly advise that you speak to your SHI rep and the device management team and procurement team about how we can help you get around some of these hikes by looking at options such as pre-ordering. 26% of the respondents were struggling to get those devices into the hands of the end users, which makes sense when no one's really going to the office at the moment. And again, that correlates with that increased demand that we're seeing for services like Zero Touch X, where everything that the employee needs, the device, but also all the peripherals as well, can be sent directly to their home, with the device either being pre-configured before it's shipped or using things like over-the-air provisioning to get that device ready for the employee to use the moment it actually arrives at the destination. And then finally, just under 32% cited the change in processes to enable pre-ordering and pre-staging as being a major concern. And again, that's something that we've worked with more customers than ever in the last 14 to 16 months to find ways to address that, to help them put those processes in place so that there is a global shortage. We can't get away from it, but we can help you adapt and overcome as best as you possibly can. Again, my apologies that the numbers on screen are actually right. The bars just got a little bit confused along the way. Now, if we move into security for a moment, one of the widely accepted truths of a move to a remote-first model is that it has significantly altered the threat landscape for organizations as more devices, data, and processing is done away from the safety of the corporate network. To that end, on May 4th, we asked the audience whether they felt they had the right tools in place to support new working models, and indeed whether they had redundancies in those. Now, I don't have this particular figure on screen right now, but it's worth noting that several independent studies have found that the average number of security tools being used by enterprise-sized organizations is a staggering 45. That's a lot of different tools to configure, monitor, and manage. Nevertheless, 50% of that May 4th audience admitted that they have gaps in their security technology stack. And over 30% said that they were not aware of any review into their current security tools being conducted, despite that wide acknowledgement that the security landscape is changing rapidly. Speaking with our experts inside SHI, they say that now is the ideal time to consider using them to undertake a thorough assessment of your security tools and practices. There is a new generation of security tools coming onto the market that offer a greater breadth of capability, as well as being more focused on the current attack vectors. So now is an excellent time to think about both streamlining the security stack and making it more relevant and effective at the same time. Now, on that note, for the security professionals and the IT leaders on today's webinar, we do have another ebook you might be interested in, looking at the top 3 security initiatives for 2021, including zero trust, optimizing the effectiveness of tools, and addressing the human factors in cybersecurity. Again, that's listed in the resources section for today's webinar, or just go and visit blog.shi.com and put a search in for security initiatives. So one of the other themes that we're seeing coming across very strongly is that organizations are shifting their focus from reacting to the need to support a remote-first workforce to one of having to establish a level of governance over this new landscape, new devices, new software, new ways of working that they now need to support. So to that end, on March 16th, we asked the audience during the webinar on unifying the hybrid workforce with communication and collaboration tools, we asked them to identify what had been the biggest challenge following the shift to remote working. Now, by far and away, the most popular response was duplication of platforms and technologies, with a combined response rate of 80% if you also include all of the above. So it's hardly surprising that we find ourselves in this position, given both how rapid change was and how business units themselves were empowered to self-select and self-procure the technologies that they felt they needed to support their business needs and to maintain a level of productivity. If you consider the 2 other responses, low adoption and low consumption, then you have a problem. You now have technologies being paid for that are either superfluous and could be replaced, or you have spend that is not delivering the optimum value back to the organization. Now, if that sounds familiar, we have another ebook that might be of interest to you. In fact, we have 2. The first of which was what recently published, and it's dedicated to helping you optimize the software spend across your organization in 2021 and beyond. And it looks at issues including redundancy and duplication, as well as offering strategies for how to manage costs and optimize the value back to the organization. Now, the second ebook is not quite ready yet. We will expect this to go live in about 2 weeks' time, but that's looking at adoption change management, or ACM, and how ACM can help you increase the overall value that your organization realizes from the software investments that it's making. Like I say, you'll see that on the hub, blog.shi.com, probably in mid-June, so keep an eye out for that. Let's now turn our attention to moving forward and into the future. So on screen, right now is a quote that I've used before. It comes from Gartner. It's my personal preference for a good definition of the hybrid workforce and the model. What I like about it is that it focuses in on three key areas. One is this concept of flowing through various work sites. I think more of us than ever are going to be mobile in some way or another going forward. The concept of microsites, which are effectively much smaller offices that perhaps are more centralized for employees' home locations. And then thirdly, this focus on productivity and engagement. You'll notice, though, that this quote comes from August last year. So it's getting on for nearly a year old. So what we thought we might do is have a look and see whether any of the research figures from the last 14 weeks bear out what Gartner is saying, or indeed contradict some of the findings and statements that are in the Gartner quote that I'm sharing. So back on March 2nd, we asked the audience to use their crystal balls to predict what their definition of hybrid work might look like in the second half of 2021. Now, I do realize that March already feels like a long time ago, so it would be interesting to repeat the exercise and see if the poll were any different today. But it's interesting to see that in March, at least, not many organizations were in tune with Gartner's concept of microsites. Under 6% were expecting to use, quotes, smaller and more dispersed locations. Now, I wonder if that's changed, and I believe it has, because I've spoken to a number of organizations that are looking at the microsites model that perhaps weren't 6 months ago. So we'll see if that changes too much. Most organizations are expecting to see some form of return to office. And again, I think that's something we can all kind of recognize and empathize with, but with greater flexibility, which definitely reflects that news article that we shared earlier. But again, 37% of organizations are expecting to adopt a truly hybrid model. What that exactly means might be open to debate, and for your organization especially or particularly, but it does affect the technology that we need to be employing. So to that extent, on April 20th, this was a webinar looking at Zero Trust, so a security-focused webinar. We asked the audience what percentage of the workforce did they think would continue to work remotely after the pandemic. Bear in mind, this was mostly a security audience. Just over 65% of the audience expected at least 41% of the workforce to continue to work remotely. So far from being exceptional, these remote workers are going to be quite normal going forward. Debatable what normal is going forward, indeed, whether there is a normal. Now, if you think back to that Gartner prediction of more focus on productivity and engagement, this is partly borne out by this poll on screen from March 23rd, which showed that the primary driver for deploying virtual applications and desktops was to support business agility. And it's worth noting that I don't have this on screen, but I can share the figures with you. On April 6th, we asked the audience what their experience with VDI had been, and only 21% had already successfully deployed a VDI solution. 16% were expecting to do so in 2021, and 37% were as yet undecided. In another poll on April 13th, 57% of the audience was cited that they were still using client VPN. So it seems that while we're adopting our working models, some of our technology is still lagging behind, and we still need to be convinced to switch to those newer, more agile technologies. So finally, let's take a step away from the SHI webinars for a moment and look at some external information. In this case, it's from IDC, and it's looking at the technologies that it expects will play a key role in supporting return to office strategies in 2022. 2021. IDC has identified 3 technology streams: transformational, incremental, and opportunistic. And it lists out, as you can see on screen right now, the technologies that it expects to be adopted in the short, medium, and long term. Now, I put this graph to our experts at SHI with backgrounds in security, collaboration, mobility, and I asked them to come back to me with whether this rang true for conversations that they were actually having with real-life SHI customers. And what we found is that while the 2 data sets do have some commonalities, there are also some important differences. So my chart is a little less attractive, and I've formatted it slightly differently, but it kind of tells the right story, which is we've broken down the technologies into 3 buckets, if you like. Shiny objects, which are the, dare I say it, sexy technologies that everyone is talking about, but not really taking much action about. Active interest, where there is a dialogue happening between SHI and customers, and they are actually evaluating technology options that are open to them. And then buying, which is, as the name suggests, going ahead and actually making purchases. So in shiny objects, we see quite a lot of the technologies that IDC touts as being quite critical to return to the office. Things like proximity monitoring, space utilization, contact tracing, etc. We're not actually seeing a huge number of organizations talking to SHI about that right now, which is not to say we can't help. We're just not seeing a great demand for it. Where we are seeing more demand is for things like virtual and augmented reality for collaboration, hoteling and hot desking, and digital signage to support staff being safe upon their return to office. So that's active discussion that's going on right now. And then in terms of the paper that is being placed with SHI, the orders that are being placed, really that's centering around employee communication right now. Now, leave that on screen for a second, but let me share with you anecdotally the results of a poll that was done on March 23rd. We asked the audience what the biggest challenge had been in adapting to working from home. Now, the number 1 option that came back with 36% of the vote was employee wellness and burnout. Probably not that surprising, if we're honest. Followed in second place with 33% of the vote with communication and collaboration. Now, if we put those together, it's pretty easy to see why our customer base is actively purchasing employee communication technologies, and rightly so, absolutely. However, I do think we need to be looking further ahead, and we need to be preempting the needs that are going to come about as we look to return to the office. Now, I said back in March that Google was targeting September for its official return to office. In fact, I think Google is a bit ahead of itself. And just about a month ago, it started inviting staff back to certain offices on a rotational basis. Now, to do this, Google is experimenting with a number of new office layout designs and new ways of using technology. But hey, they're Google. They can. If your organization is targeting a similar return to the office and your physical workspace is not ready to do that, you will have problems, either because your staff won't want to come back or because you may be prevented from bringing your staff back if you fall foul of either state or federal laws on what safe return to the office place looks like. So to that end, of course, we have another ebook that I'd like to share with you. And this one is the 3 critical experiences to transform your organization. And in it, we explore opportunities to improve the employee experience, the customer experience, and the workplace experience. Again, you can download that from resources, or you can go find it on blog.shi.com. So there you have it. Part 1 of the SHI Hybrid Workforce webinar series is finally at an end. Remember, if you missed any of the sessions, especially those that I have referenced on today's summary, you can view them all on demand at your leisure for the next month or so on the On24 platform. After that, they will still be available, but they will be moved to blog.shi.com on our hub. Again, if you would like to speak to an expert at SHI about any of the topics that we have covered on today's webinar, or indeed any of the previous 13, just reach out. Either use that Q&A function that I told you about earlier, or send an email to your rep, and we will find the best way to put you in contact with the best people at SHI to help you with your particular questions. So it only remains for me to say thank you. Thank you for your continued support across this entire series, and thank you for your attention. Moving forward, we are really hopeful that we will see a return to in-person events in fall 2021. I think we will absolutely continue with these virtual events as well, because they're proving extremely popular, but nothing quite beats the opportunity to see you face to face. And I'd like to say shake hands. It might just have to be a fist pump or even an elbow pump, but to see you and to welcome you to our global HQ in Somerset, New Jersey. Here's hoping that happens, but for the time being, please enjoy the virtual events that are available, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much for listening. See you soon. Bye-bye.